But today we have Sean Enns, who's an integrated services manager with the Nanaimo Association for Community Living. He's a steadfast advocate for accessibility, inclusion, and disability rights in the community, particularly within the arts and employment sectors. He currently holds a seat on the City of Nanaimo's Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusion, and with the Director of Employment Services, Barb Berry, leads employment initiatives at NACL, which is the Nanaimo Association for Community Living. So I'll probably say NACL a few times, and that's what that means.
Hello. Yeah, my name's Sean, so that intro is pretty effective. I got into this work. I met my current partner about 14 years ago. When I met her, she has a son. Her son, who's my son now, is autistic with a developmental disability. I learned a lot. I didn't know anything. I started learning stuff. I kept learning for 10 years. And then at one point, we were just talking about stuff, and I said, I think there's something interesting going on with me. And, you know, I'm 50 now, so I was about 45 when I started thinking about this. And my partner said, yeah, you think? And so,
Ouch.
That's okay. It was her turn 2 years later, so I don't feel too bad. I said, yeah, I do think. And so I did the online WHO test. It came up 100% ADHD. So I aced that test, as I often do. And then, yeah, I went and talked to my GP. I'm one of 6 people lucky enough to have a longtime GP in Nanaimo. So I went and talked to her. She said, yep, totally. You check all the ADHD boxes. And sort of went from there. And so as soon as I got it, I knew what the diagnosis was, which was attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That doesn't mean anything. Those are just letters. I think 1,000 years ago, we probably called it something else. And in 1,000 years from now, we'll probably call it something else. But right now, it's a collection of 4 letters that someone came up with a long time ago. So I wanted to figure out what it means. So I did a deep dive, as we all like to do. And sort of figured it out. And then I said, well, it's helping me not just to know that I have this and to be on meds and to be getting therapy, but also to understand that a disorder is just something that somebody decided it was when they decided that this behavior didn't fit into traditional systems. I kind of enjoy overthrowing systems. So I decided to try not to look at it as entirely a disorder. Obviously, there are challenges around certain things like time perception, object constancy, emotional impermanence, all these fun little things. But then I said, I want to help other people. I want to ask questions. I want to question systems. I want to find employers that are going to be useful. I want to figure out how to advocate for myself in employment, and I want to figure out how to advocate for other people. I had been working for a not-for-profit in food security. I had developed some programs for people with disabilities. My contract came to an end, and then decided that NACL would be a good fit for me to go and continue that advocacy work. So in terms of accommodations, I guess there's some general stuff, and I'll just preface this by saying that it's very different being an adult with ADHD to being a child with ADHD, because generally in adult service, as soon as anyone turns 19, everything goes away and you have to start from zero. There's a lot less money for adults. There's a lot fewer resources for adults. So it's much, much, much harder to access supports when you're an adult. I hope that changes. It hasn't changed in the time that I've been diagnosed or been looking. It seems like there's some great advocates out there now. So hopefully that changes and the money stream changes a little bit. Mostly it seems like it's up to the individual, as we keep hearing, to self-advocate for themselves. Part of that is understanding yourself and understanding that everything is dual impact, right? We can talk about disability. Disability is a systems barrier, not a personal barrier. So you're not disabled, the system disables you by creating barriers that that prevent you from accessing support, right? So if you have limited mobility, and there are no ramps, then you can't get places. That's a systems problem, that's not a you problem. If you're late for everything, it's because a system insists on having everything start at the same time every day and doesn't maybe appreciate that some people don't perceive time in different ways. So that's, again, a systems problem, not a you problem. So we call that the dual impact of ADHD. Now when I talk to people, I talk about trying to understand the dual impact as early as possible so that when you're in a workplace, and it's not all workplaces because not all employers are great, we would like them to be, and the laws say they're supposed to be, but you know, it's a wild world and reality doesn't always reflect understanding. So I try and say, well, understand the things that ADHD is. Many CEOs, many leaders, myself included, have ADHD. People with ADHD are excellent problem solvers. They're very creative. They have different perspectives. They're generally, not when they're young, and I can speak to this personally, ADHD, I think one of the core tenets I would say of ADHD is impulsivity. When you're young, impulsivity is bad because you're bad at making measured risk, right? When you're young, you just make a lot of bad choices because you're like, I'm gonna try this and see how it works, and I'm gonna try this and see how it works. As you get older, you get practice taking risks, and the risks become more measured. I'm no less impulsive today than I was when I was 20. I'm just better at it now. So I'm better at assessing risk quickly. I'm better at making quick decisions that tend to turn out in my favor. So I don't think I'm a different person. I think I'm just an older person. So the sooner that I think we can help young people sort of say, look, yes, it's called a disorder, and it's it, but actually you bring a lot of benefits that employers want. I know also that particularly, I would say in the last years, more than half my friend group, which is not a surprise, includes women who have received a late in life diagnosis of ADHD. They're all incredibly high performing, they're all leaders in their organizations, they're all doing incredible work, they're all tremendous advocates, very bright. And they're sort of starting to come around to this, oh, well, I've been masking or coping for the last 40 years because this is what women have been told to do, because apparently up until about 7 years ago, I think, women didn't get ADHD, and it turns out, right? You've all, I'm sure, experienced this on some level, that you were just introverted and maybe quiet and maybe not just pushing it all down and pouring stuff on top of it. So yeah, I think we're now saying, oh, it turns out that ADHD does persist into adulthood, which is a delightful surprise that many of us have all known, and that it turns out that women also get ADHD, and it just looks different than it does in young boys who have the freedom to run around and crash into walls and do all that fun stuff that women are not granted permission to do. So I think understanding the dual impact is really important. Understanding what we bring to employers is really important, because when an employer is excellent, and we like to think that they all are, but they're just not, because we know on average people with disabilities get paid less. We know that women already get paid less, so if you're a woman with a disability, you're going to get paid even less. We know that asking for accommodations is a crapshoot. So if the employer's there, if they're already there emotionally and socially, and they're like, oh yes, absolutely, we want to do this, and they're following all the rules and making those offers and then honoring those things, that's great. Often they're not. So it then becomes a thing like, well, it's going to cost you more not to give me the accommodations than it's going to cost you to give them to me, which is something that I try and advocate for people to have those conversations early on, to understand that being able to sit and do something for 8 hours and power through and create something amazing like this event is a trait of people with ADHD. Often not everyone can sit down and power through and hyper-focus and create something amazing like this. That is a trait, it has value. If it doesn't exist, it has a cost to employers, so employers want this. Employers want people who are explorative, who have courage, who are curious. This is all in a great paper I read a few years ago called Silver Linings of ADHD. They want people with insight. They want people who are resilient. There's nobody more resilient than somebody that's had to grow up ice skating uphill against a system that wants them to be different than they are, right? Disability breeds resilience. So people want people who are resilient. They want people who are tolerant, because when you've not been tolerated, you become more tolerant. They want people who are empathic, because when people have not had empathy to you, then, you know what I'm saying. I could do this all day. Anyway, you have to be your own best advocate. It's the same thing if you're a parent of a kid with ADHD, you have to be their best advocate. You have to be loud, because nobody listens to quiet people. Nobody's going to offer anything to you, even though legally they're supposed to. So I'll talk about that in a second. People are always going to wait to ask, and they're always going to give it to the person that asks. That's going to cause the most problems if they don't get it, right? And problems can't just be continued phone calls or continued advocacy or letters or human rights challenges or all of these things. So it can be that they want those things to go away. But generally, employers don't want to give accommodations, because those things cost money, they cost human resources, they cost time. So they can be on your side, but they're not always. I'm very fortunate to have an employer who's been great and is on my side, but I still had to ask for stuff. I still had to have negotiations around my tenuous grasp on time and my sort of frankness. I've had to have negotiations and say, well, you get this time, so like here are the 20 times I did this that it worked, so don't get upset with me for the 3 times it didn't. I was in a position, also being a 50-year-old white guy, to have that conversation. Not everybody is, so you have to put yourself in a position and sort of insist on those things. And generally speaking, as someone who works in employment, I would say that the employers need you more than you need them. It's a good market now to kind of walk into places. If you have skills, if you're a good, strong self-advocate, if you're able to sort of encapsulate these traits. So accommodations, just generally. So this year, the province of BC put out their new draft standards for accessibility. That says that you don't have to disclose. An employer has to ask several times throughout your career if you would like accommodations. You don't have to explain why you need them unless it causes hardship. What they say is unreasonable hardship, being compromises the health and safety of someone else at the organization or costs an egregious amount of money. What that is, it's up to the organization. An egregious amount of money for a small business would be asking them to spend $10,000 on an accommodation for one individual. They can't do it, it would bankrupt them. Asking the government of Canada to spend $10,000 is not egregious. They have plenty of money. So it depends on the employer. Undue hardship, yeah, it is safety. Like if we do this thing for you, someone else could get really hurt. Not emotionally hurt, but like actually hurt. Something could fall on their head and kill them. They could fall. Something bad could really happen. So they're supposed to offer those things. And then if we say we want them, they're supposed to make those available. And then they're supposed to make those available to everyone in the organization. They don't, because nobody polices it. So it's like organic food. If nobody checks, then what difference does it make, right? But those are the rights. So if you're with a long-term employer, you can always ask for those things. They are supposed to offer those things. If they don't, you can cite them on the accessibility standards and say, well, you're supposed to offer those things to me if you really like that job. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. Generally, I would say it's up to you. For young people, I would say asking for accommodations is just, it's harder when you're young, because especially I think for ADHD, we have a lot of rejection problems. My way into ADHD was learning about rejection sensitive dysphoria. I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I seem really confident. I have a real problem with rejection. It's fine. Please don't leave me. Yeah, when you're young, it's more profound. Being rejected from a job, being rejected from a place, being rejected by an employer, being rejected by anyone has like a causes physical pain and takes a long time to recover, and so it means we don't take as many risks. And so for young people, what I try and do is just urge them to sort of clinicize it and be like, yeah, it's happening. It happens differently for other people. We're just going to power through and try and ask for the thing and do the thing anyway. You're probably going to try a lot of jobs until you find the one that's meaningful for you. But we have to learn how to acknowledge, and I do love the parts of me that are ADHD. I love the parts of me that can come in and do stuff like this, that can hyper-focus, that do it. I don't love the parts of it that do other things. It is kind of a mixed bag. I do try and compartmentalize it when it's not working for me, and call it a bad dog and make it go sit in the house while I get through a thing. So I think we have to work with people not to mask, but to cope, right? I think part of the challenge that people face is masking. Masking has long-term deleterious effects on us. The longer we do it, the worse it gets. Then when it comes out, we really feel unseen, we really feel unheard, we feel like we're being weird. People are like, nope, put that back away, we're not interested. So I think it's really important to, as we get into adulthood, to learn how to use these talents we have, to learn how to use our creativity, to learn how to use our impulsiveness, to learn how to use these things not just to benefit the places we work, but to benefit ourselves. Yeah, I guess I talk a lot because I have ADHD. But I also really like I like answering questions. I do like asking questions, but I really like answering them. So if anyone has questions. I realize at a long point that people will take as much as you give. So if you give all of yourself, people will take all of you. And then they'll ask for 10% more because they realize that you're probably brilliant, you're probably incredibly capable, you're probably a tremendous asset, and they're like, hey, let's bring this out and see what we get out of it. And so I realized that very early on in my career in the nonprofit sector. And then I realized that it doesn't actually matter if I say no. That when I say no to stuff, that the things don't go away. And I think that was a really hard lesson. Boundaries are an incredibly hard lesson for people with ADHD to learn. So your question is, how do I navigate burnout? I refuse to let people do it to me. I embrace the fact that I am an asset, that I am interesting, that I am useful. I must be because I'm sitting here, because you're all looking at me. So I must be a little bit useful. People keep asking me to do stuff. So if I say no, if I set boundaries, it doesn't mean they're gonna stop asking me to do stuff. It just means they're gonna, can I swear? It just means they're gonna wait a minute, while I cope, while I get through the thing that I get to, while I get my inbox down to 0 so I don't have a panic attack over the weekend, while I do these things that I need to do so that I can go be excellent the next week. And organizations are hungry for capable, awesome people.
So is there any resources, basically like scripts?
Yeah.
That's actually something that we sort of tried to put into our HBC workshop that we did. I did one with Dr. Murray, Dr. Candice Murray, who's on our professional advisory council, because I was like, I think we need to give people scripts when they're going to talk to their employer and saying look, we're going to sit down here now and have a discussion because I'm feeling some burnout, and then start with your strengths and I know I'm really great. A really great employee here, talk yourself up. I just love your words, how you describe that. We are the people who give 150%.
Yeah.
All the time. If we're doing 120%, we think we're failing, which is absolutely ridiculous because other people are doing 50% and they think they're winning. It's just we set these huge, high expectations for ourselves. And that's something I've been working on myself, is the boundaries for my life. And it requires, though, a lot of introspection, a lot of self-reflection. If you can get a really good counselor who understands ADHD and things like that, highly recommend going through that with them and saying, okay, so what are my challenges here? What am I burning out on? What can I get rid of? What can I give up? What can I dial down? What can I dial down? And where can I schedule more time for myself in there? I've been doing that a lot more lately, and definitely not as burnt out as I could have been. These are just things that I've started to put into my life because I've only known I've had ADHD for 3 years, and I've only now given myself that time, giving myself time for that introspection, that time for learning, that self-awareness of who we are as people. As we were talking about in the Women with ADHD, is understanding yourself and who you are, getting to learn yourself again. Once you get this diagnosis, it's hard. It's like kind of a switch in the brain. I have a really hard time asking for accommodations in my different workspaces, except for the one at VIU, because that's what we do, is we literally do accommodations for students with disabilities. So I love that job, because I can literally go in there and say, you know what, I really need to, I think that it would be really great if we could just write this down and have it on a sheet or whatever, and boom, we're doing it, right? And it'll help everybody. It's that universal design that you're talking about too, is that, you know, you should be doing this for one person, but you should be offering that to everybody, right? It sucks though, because we do have to do a lot of the labor in our workplace to educate them and to advocate for what we need specifically, without maybe perhaps losing our job, especially as women who we're not feeling as in control and valued, safe in our job sometimes, because we feel like we have to be perfection. And if we're not, we're held to a very high standard. Sometimes it's only in our brain. Sometimes our employers are like, "That's great, that's fine," but it is hard. It's something that we need to really work on and take that time for ourselves to sit within ourselves to really reflect on what is it that I really need. I wrote this down because while you were talking, I'm like, I really want to say these things. So finding that support in the systems. People listening to folks who do this advocacy within their work, and outside of their work, hearing from them, what are they saying, what are they doing, learning from them, some pointers. I think we really need to work on scripts and things like that, and I think that would be a really great project, actually. Yeah? Okay, great.
Yeah, so one thing I'll offer is anyone who has ADHD, who wants to talk to someone who's doing okay with ADHD, you can just talk to me about it. So you can send me a text, send me a message, I will talk to you. I think one thing that gets us all loopy is we get outside of our job description and the piles start coming and people say, well, we're going to do this and you're so great and we're going to give you this portfolio and we're going to give you this thing and we're going to give you this thing. And we're like, oh, thank goodness they really see my value, because I certainly don't. And so I'm going to do all these things because I need to keep convincing them that I am of value. And so that becomes a thing. So I would say the script is, the first thing to do is actually figure out what your job is. You will always work at 150%. Most people are not. And so I really internalized that most people are actually just doing their job. So start there. Or they're doing a little bit less, or they're doing it to some varying degree. Start at the fact of what most other people are doing, which is just their job. And say, okay, what would happen? And then just have this conversation with yourself. What would happen if you did your job? Oh, is that so uncomfortable for everybody? It is, right? But like, what would actually happen if you just did your job? And didn't just like go the minute you were faced with being idle and like got caught up and cleared your inbox and responded to everybody and sent all the letters you had to send and did all the things you had to do, and you actually had 2 hours. You're allowed to have that. You're allowed to be caught up on your work and not panicking and not have to run out and go, you're so uncomfortable right now, it's great. And not run out and go and ask someone, I have an hour of free time, give me something to do. Stop doing that. One, because we're perpetuating this by filling up the time, and no one can fire you for doing your job. People are always going to give you a dirty sock. And the dirty sock is, have you read the email, right? So he's waiting. He doesn't need to ask you that question then. He can wait any time to ask you that question. He can wait until you get back. But he really needs you to have his dirty sock in that moment. You don't want his dirty sock, so of course you say, I don't want your dirty sock. Keep your dirty sock away from me. And so then he's like, why? It's not that dirty, it's just a sock. And now you're in an argument about this sock that he really needs you to have. He really needs you to have this sock so that it's not his problem anymore.
I really like this.
So at some point, I learned, okay, well, you can't really engage on that level because people want to make their problem your problem. Especially when you're a high performer, especially when you're incredibly competent, they always want to make their problem your problem. So I just try, and it doesn't always work, but one of the things I do is just acknowledge that it's a problem. So how do we talk to our kids when they come to us with a dirty sock? That's a dirty sock. I'm sorry you have a dirty sock. That sounds really difficult. I'm going to look at that dirty sock later. And so it's not, I don't have time to look at it. I do have time, but I'm just not going to respond to whatever this is. This is not good for you. This is not good for me. I'm going to respond to this, and I'm excited to respond to this later. But right now, I'm going to need you to hold on to this dirty sock for a little while, okay? So that has actually been, and we talked earlier about catching more, vinegar versus honey. So I never say I don't have time. I never, because then they have an in to say, well, why don't you have time? What are you doing with your time? What's your problem anyway? Why aren't you doing all these things? So I need to come audit your office? It's like, no, back off, go inside, do whatever you're gonna do. I'll check the email when I get back. I'm not gonna respond to it anyway. What difference does it make? So I do try and compartmentalize things into whose problem it really is. And just be aware that other people really want to make their problem your problem. So that's part of understanding in the workplace, that's part of building my own confidence in those spaces, to just not accept the dirty sock. And that takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes confidence, and so you're not always going to be successful when you do that, but you're going to be successful once when you refuse to accept, or think of it as tennis, when someone's like, and you just drop the racket. You don't have to hit the ball back all the time, right? You can just refuse to play. These things, these little the texts late at night, did you see this thing? All of this stuff, this isn't real. These are pressures that employers manufacture, and as long as people respond to those, then people will keep doing it. Yeah. I have had varying degrees of success with employers who wanted to do things that way, and I set boundaries and said, I'm not doing that. You can't call me at night, because I don't want to, because I'm watching the Great British Bake Off, right? I just don't, it's not important. It's important to me, and it's certainly more important than whatever you're going through, so I'm just not interested. And they did pass me up for opportunities then, and they did give things to other people, even though I had spent more time and thought I was excellent. I was like, yeah, do I want to perpetuate into that system, or do I just want to build my experience here and then use that and move on to the next thing? By the way, which is what literally everyone else does, right? There's no loyalty in workplaces. People go and they work and they build their thing and then they move on to the next thing. So that seems fine, so I'm just going to do that. And so it's a little bit of gaming the system, and it's a little bit of refusing to play with their dirty socks. I don't think people with ADHD have a problem with time management. I think that's something that people say. I think I am actually incredible at time management. I use a calendar. I keep everything very organized. I show up at all my appointments on time. I'm rarely late. I think what ADHD is it's a challenge with time perception, which is very different than time management. So, how long have we been sitting here? Does anybody have any idea how long we've been sitting here? No, of course you don't. You know why? Because you have ADHD. So, people with ADHD...
If I look at the clock.
Right. We know if we look at the clock, we're like, oh, it's been that long, but it could have been 20 minutes, it could have been 40 minutes. People with ADHD are not good at judging the amount of time it takes to do something, which is why we're excellent, by the way, at hyperfocus, because we can sit down and do something for 19 hours and be like, that was the fastest thing that's ever happened to me, right? So, yeah, but we're not good at it. So, women, almost entirely, all of you will say, I have to be at the school at 8:45. Fantastic. I'm just going to squeeze in 5 more things between 8:20 and 8:45, and each of them is going to take me 6 minutes, and I'm going to arrive perfectly on time, because it takes me 7 minutes to get there by car, and you're all out of your minds, because everything always takes longer than we think.
Red lights.
Red lights always take longer, tasks always take longer, kids always take longer to get their boots on because they don't want to. Everything takes longer, the hairdryer doesn't, whatever thing you're trying to do always takes longer than you think. So then we're faced with a choice. Either sit and stare for an hour before I go somewhere, right? Which is my whole life. By the way, today I was ready to leave my house at noon. I was sitting there, I had my boots on, I had my jacket on. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna, not leave. So I'm like, okay, what can I accomplish in the next 2 hours? Well, I can go get gas and I can go get groceries, and I'll just be an hour early. And was I an hour early? Yeah. No.
I know, see, time.
Yeah, but yeah, I was a period of time early, and then I was out there talking to Melanie, who I hadn't seen, and I'm panicking because I'm like, how long have I been talking to Melanie for? Am I going to be late for my panel? So it's just not good. So I do leave a lot of time for myself to manage these things, and I try not to squeeze in the stuff. Now, in the context of that, yeah, schools are brutally time-based, which is a nightmare for ADHD people, right? Show up at this time, leave this, go do this, do it all when a bell rings. I would rather die, and it's why I did very poorly in school. It is an us thing because it's hard to communicate to places that are really time-based and time-driven that I am just going to show up 5 minutes late. Sometimes if you have an empathetic person, you can say, yeah, I have ADHD, it's really hard for me to do this. I have all these things to do in my day before I get here. So I will be 5 minutes late, but I will be 5 minutes late, but I will always stay 5 minutes late. And I will volunteer and I will do these other things that pick up, because this is part of how I work, is that giving of 150%. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do probably lots of stuff that's not your job. So I would point that out to them and say, yeah, I mean, you're giving me trouble for being 5 minutes late, but also I stood there during the lunch, I did this thing, I showed up at the meeting and helped organize to do these other. So let's talk about the trade-off that I can't actually help, is to be and by the way, congratulations for being exactly on time. An employer, if you walk through the door at 8:45, ready to work, then they should shut their pie hole. Because you start at 8:45. So there's no, we get into this whole thing of if you're not 10 minutes early, you're late. But that's not actually true. You're being paid to start at 8:45. So if you show up at 8:45 and have a coffee and tootle around and you're not really working for another 20 minutes, that's a problem. But if you walk through the door and start working, then you're on time. So I will do stuff like that because there's also a culture around showing up early, starting early, people milling about. These are all neurotypical things. We're going to show up 5 minutes perfectly early and ready and have our coffee and sip and dawdle and stand and gossip. And no, people with ADHD show up and okay, I'm working now. I walk through the door and I'm working. Because I'm not going to sit at my work and not work. Who does that even? Nobody. So yeah, I show up at work and I start working immediately because that's my nature. So if you're doing that, then you're doing your job and they should leave you alone. How to ADHD is a great YouTube channel. She's delightful. She talks about adult ADHD. Most of by the way, I will just say that there's a lot that women are really leading this charge. There's a lot of guys with ADHD in their adulthood who are folding their arms and be like, no, not me, I'm fine. So it really is women doing a lot of the adult advocacy, and I'm very grateful for that. To see that energy. So How to ADHD is a great one. And so the other thing we've learned is that ADHD is a spectrum, autism is a spectrum. There's an incredibly high co-occurrence rate that now we just call it ADHD, right? Particularly affects women, all y'all, probably a little bit of both, probably some sensory processing stuff. So there is a great site called Embrace Autism. That's a woman out of Ontario, I think. A doctor out of Ontario started it. That's where my partner got their diagnosis. Yeah, that's been a tremendous resource. And they have a lot of good information, not just about that, but about, they have some information about ADHD. There's a organization called Frida that's got some, that's where I got my secondary diagnosis. Just because I trust my GP, but I wanted to go through something more official. So that's where I got my secondary diagnosis. They have some good information. There are a lot of counselors out there that are specialize in ADHD and neurodivergence, so that's where I would say good. There are ADHD coaches. I don't know. I've never tried an ADHD coach. I think they may or may not be useful. I would always be cautious about giving someone a bunch of money who wasn't credentialed. I think it sounds like, there's probably an opportunity to start some peer support groups. I think that's hugely important. It's just to talk to other people about your experience, just be open and honest. And that's sort of how I've ended up here, is when I got it, I just didn't feel like hiding it, and so I just tell everybody that'll listen all about it. I think most people are pretty compassionate. There's more people who experience it than not, and they're everywhere. It's not just here. I've experienced people working within the city environment. I've experienced people in leadership positions at my job. I've experienced people throughout this community who are really compassionate and understanding and are just, we all want to talk.
On our website too, at ADHDBCSociety.com, we do have a list of resources. We're going to be adding to that list. There's a lot that we could put up there. These are kind of vetted that we're comfortable with. There's some more that we realized, oh darn, we didn't put those on there. Like Dr. Russell Barkley is a good one. He talks more about children, but towards the end of his career, he started talking more about adults as well. His brother was ADHD. And I actually really like his just frankness about it.
I don't think we're inattentive. I think we can't help but pay attention to everything.
Yeah, variable attention.
If we're interested.
If we're interested,
Yeah.
exactly.
Even
Sometimes
Even
we're
if we're
interested
not,
in
I
everything.
just notice everything. Like I can't tune stuff out. So it's either everything or that.
But thank you very much, everybody, for coming and listening to us and talking with us and sharing your stories and connecting with us. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to doing it again.